The clay tablet is still warm in his hands. The young scribe's fingers tremble as he presses the wedge-shaped stylus into the soft surface one more time. Outside, he can hear the shouts. The enemy army is at the gates of Uruk. His city, the greatest city on Earth, has maybe hours left. But he keeps writing, because if he doesn't record what happened here, if he doesn't preserve this moment, it will vanish like smoke. Everything his people built, everything they discovered, all of it could disappear forever. He doesn't know it yet, but what he's doing right now, this simple act of marking clay, is using an invention so powerful that it will outlive empires. It will outlive kingdoms. It will outlive the very language he's writing in. 5,000 years from now, people will dig up his words and read them. But right now, in this moment, all he knows is fear and determination, and the desperate need to make sure someone remembers. This is where we need to start. Not at the beginning, but at a moment when everything hung in the balance. Because the story of the Sumerians isn't just about people who lived a long time ago. It's about people who faced impossible odds and decided to create something anyway. People who looked at disaster and responded with innovation. People who understood something we often forget. That civilization is fragile, precious, and absolutely worth fighting for. So, let's go back. Back before that scribe city fell. Back to when there was nothing at all. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and your phone is gone. Not just your phone, the ability to read the words you're reading right now. Gone, money, gone, schools, gone, laws, gone, beer, gone. Even the 60 minutes you call an hour, vanished. Every single thing you take for granted in modern life has been erased. Now, imagine you're standing in southern Iraq 5,000 years ago. It's brutally hot. The kind of heat that makes you understand why ancient people prayed to water gods. The temperature can hit 120 degrees in summer. You're surrounded by flat land that stretches to the horizon. Two rivers wind through the landscape, the Tigris and Euphrates. But they're not gentle rivers. They flood without warning. They change course. They destroy as often as they give life. There are no cities here, no buildings, no roads, nothing. Just small groups of people trying to survive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. And then, something happens. Something that will change humanity forever. A group of people, we call them Sumerians, though we still don't really know where they came from. Look at this harsh, unforgiving land, and make a decision that seems absolutely insane. They decide to stay. Not just stay, but build. Not just build, but create something the world has never seen before. Within 1,000 years, they transform this flood-prone desert into humanity's first cities. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash. Cities with tens of thousands of people living together. And here's what's wild. While the Sumerians are building these massive urban centers with governments and trade networks and complex social systems, most people on Earth are still living in tiny villages, hunting and gathering, maybe doing some basic farming. The Sumerians aren't just ahead of everyone else. They're playing a completely different game. But why? What drives people to attempt something so audacious? What makes someone look at a desert and see possibility? The answer isn't simple, and it starts with a problem that nearly broke them. You need to understand what farming meant in southern Mesopotamia, because it wasn't like farming anywhere else. The land doesn't get enough rain to grow crops. None. You plant seeds in that soil, and they die. End of story. So, the Sumerians looked at those two massive rivers and had an idea that required something humanity had never really done before at this scale. Total cooperation. They built irrigation systems. Not just a canal or two, an entire network of channels, dikes, and waterways that brought river water to the fields. Imagine trying to control a river that floods randomly, that changes course without warning, that can drown your crops one month and leave them to die of thirst the next. Now, imagine doing this without any modern tools, any concrete, any pumps. Just human labor, human ingenuity, human determination. Here's the thing about irrigation on that scale. It can't be done by individuals. One family can't build and maintain the canals needed to water enough land to feed a city. You need organization. You need someone coordinating hundreds, then thousands of people. You need rules about water rights. You need punishment for people who damage the shared canals. You need record keeping to track who contributed what labor. In other words, you need government, you need bureaucracy, you need laws. The Sumerians didn't set out to invent civilization. They were just trying to eat. But to eat in that environment, they had to create systems of organization so complex that they accidentally invented civilizations in the process. And once you have thousands of people working together, living together, depending on each other, you've created something unstable, something that could collapse into chaos at any moment, unless you find a way to keep track of it all. That's where the real problem started, the problem that led to one of humanity's most important inventions, but also an invention that came with a terrible price. Picture a temple administrator in the city of Uruk around 3,200 years before the Common Era. His name is lost to history. Let's call him Enlil-Nasir. Every morning, Enlil-Nasir wakes up with a knot of anxiety in his stomach because his job is impossible. He needs to track how much grain is in the temple storehouse, how many sheep the temple owns, how much beer was brewed this month, who owes what to whom, which workers showed up for which days. The temple isn't just a religious building. It's a bank, a government office, an employer, a landowner, all rolled into one. It runs a significant chunk of the city's economy. At first, they used a system of clay tokens, little shaped objects where each shape meant something different. A cone for grain, a sphere for oil, a disc for a sheep. You wanted to record that someone deposited 10 units of grain? You took 10 cone-shaped tokens and sealed them in a clay envelope. But as the city grew, as trade expanded, as the economy became more complex, the token system started breaking down. There were too many transactions, too many things to track. Enlil-Nasir is drowning in clay tokens. He's making mistakes. Important deals are falling through the cracks. People are arguing about who owes what because there's no clear record. He needs a better system. The whole city needs a better system. Because without accurate record keeping, the entire economic structure could collapse. Trust would evaporate, trade would fail, the city could starve. So, Enlil-Nasir tries something new. Instead of using actual tokens, what if he just presses the shapes of the tokens into wet clay? Creates a permanent record that can't be altered or lost. He smooths out a clay tablet and starts making impressions. One mark for grain, another mark for oil, numbers indicated by different sized marks. He has no idea what he's just done. He has no idea that this simple act, making marks in clay to represent objects, is the seed of something that will change humanity forever. Because over the next few centuries, something remarkable happens. Those simple pictures start to evolve. The mark for sheep starts being used for the sound biah, in other words. Suddenly, you're not just recording objects, you're recording sounds, recording language itself, recording thoughts. Writing has been invented. But here's what nobody tells you about the invention of writing. It didn't spread because it was beautiful or poetic. It spread because cities couldn't function without it. And once you could write things down, once you could create permanent records, you created something else. Permanence, memory, history. You also created power, massive concentrated power in the hands of those who could read and write. Imagine being a child in Sumer around 2,800 years before the Common Era. Your father is a merchant, relatively wealthy. He's decided you're going to become a scribe. You're maybe 7 years old. You don't want to go to school. You want to play with your friends. But your father drags you to the tablet house, the school, and your life becomes a nightmare. Every single day, from dawn until dusk, you sit on a hard floor, copying cuneiform characters onto clay tablets. There are hundreds of characters to memorize, hundreds. And they're not intuitive, they're abstract, complex. Your hand cramps, your back aches. And if you make a mistake, if your characters aren't perfect, the teacher hits you with a rod, hard enough to leave bruises. We actually have one of these students' tablets that survived. He writes, and I'm paraphrasing here, about how miserable he is, how he arrives late and gets beaten, how he talks without permission and gets beaten, how his handwriting isn't good enough and gets beaten. Then he writes about how his dad brings expensive gifts to the teacher, wine, new clothes, some silver. And suddenly, magically, the teacher thinks his writing is excellent. The teacher praises him, tells him he's talented. 5,000 years later, and some things never change. But here's the crucial part. This kid is suffering through this brutal education because being literate meant everything. In a world where maybe 1% of people could read and write, being a scribe meant job security, wealth, status, power. Scribes became the lawyers, accountants, government officials, and priests. They were the people who made the system work, and they knew it. Scribes wrote poems about how great it was to be a scribe, how scribes didn't have to do manual labor in the hot sun, how scribes controlled information and therefore controlled society. But this created a problem that would haunt Sumerian civilization and eventually contribute to its downfall. Because when knowledge is concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite, when most people can't read the laws that govern them or the contracts they're signing, when the priesthood controls access to the gods and the government controls access to power through literacy, you've created a society that's extremely efficient but also extremely brittle, and brittle things break under pressure. Let me take you inside the mind of a regular Sumerian, not a scribe or priest or government official, just a regular person. You're a farmer. Your name is Nana Sig. You wake up before dawn because you need to work your field before the heat becomes unbearable. You walk through the narrow streets of your neighborhood on the outskirts of Uruk. The city is already awake. You can hear the sounds of craftsmen starting their work, the smell of bread baking, the bleating of goats. Your field is outside the city walls. You grow barley. That's basically what everyone grows. Barley for bread, barley for beer, barley to pay your taxes, barley to trade for everything else you need. You don't own this field, not really. The temple owns it. You farm it and give them a portion of the harvest. That portion feels steep. Sometimes you wonder if the priests are cheating you, but you can't read the records. You can't verify anything. You have to trust them. Trust. That word is heavy in your mind. You have to trust the priests aren't lying about what you owe. Trust the government isn't going to raise taxes again. Trust the canals will be maintained. Trust the city guard will protect you if another city attacks. Trust the gods won't send a flood or plague. That's a lot of trust for someone who has very little control over their own life. You work until midday, when the heat becomes dangerous. Then you head back to the city. You stop at a beer house, basically an ancient bar. The woman who runs it, Kubaba, pours you a bowl of beer from a large jar. The beer is thick, cloudy, nutritious. You drink it through a reed straw to avoid the sediment. It's safer than drinking water from the canal. The alcohol kills the bacteria. You sit there, drinking your beer, and you overhear a conversation. Two men are talking in low voices. There's trouble with the city of Lagash, a border dispute over some farmland. The king is considering military action. That means the army will be mobilized. That means every able-bodied man might be conscripted. That means you could be pulled away from your farm at harvest time. That means your family could starve. The fear settles in your stomach like a stone. You think about the ziggurat, the massive temple at the center of the city. It rises up like a mountain, visible from everywhere. The priests say the gods live there, that the gods protect the city. But you wonder sometimes if the gods care about people like you. The gods seem to mostly care about receiving offerings. Expensive offerings. Offerings that come from the sweat of farmers like you. Life in Sumer is precarious. Always has been. The rivers can flood without warning. Diseases sweep through crowded cities. Other cities can attack. Crops can fail. Any of these things can kill you and everyone you love. So you pray. You make offerings. You follow the laws. You pay your taxes. You do everything right. And you hope it's enough. But hope is not the same as security. And deep down, you know that. Let's talk about what the Sumerians believed about why they existed. Because it's not comforting. According to Sumerian mythology, humans were created by the gods for one purpose: to do the work the gods didn't want to do anymore. We're literally divine servants. The gods made us because they were tired of growing their own food, building their own temples, doing their own labor. Think about what that means for how you see yourself and your place in the universe. You're not special. You're not made in the image of the divine with inherent dignity. You're a tool, a convenience for beings who are more powerful than you and who can destroy you on a whim. The gods in Sumerian mythology aren't particularly moral. They're not watching over you with love. They have their own agendas, their own feuds, their own desires. Sometimes they help humans. Sometimes they destroy entire cities because one god insulted another. You're just collateral damage in their cosmic drama. This worldview shaped everything about Sumerian society. The massive temples, the powerful priesthood, the constant offerings and rituals. You had to keep the gods happy, because unhappy gods meant disaster, flood, drought, plague, invasion. But here's what's interesting. Despite this rather grim theology, the Sumerians kept building. They kept creating. They kept innovating. Why? Because even though they believed their individual lives were temporary and subject to divine whims, they also believed that what they built could last. Their city could endure. Their children could carry on their legacy. Their names could be remembered. There's a famous piece of Sumerian literature called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's about a king who watches his best friend die and becomes obsessed with finding immortality. He goes on this quest, faces impossible challenges, and finally finds the secret to eternal life. But then he loses it through a simple mistake. He returns home, defeated. But then he looks at his city, Uruk, the massive walls, the grand temples, the thriving population, and he realizes that this is his immortality, not his own life, but what he built, what he created, what he leaves behind. It's a profound idea, and it's what drove the Sumerians forward even in the face of uncertainty and danger. But that drive came at a cost, because to build those cities, to maintain those irrigation systems, to feed those populations, they needed organization, control, hierarchy. And that meant some people had to be at the bottom. Here's what they don't tell you about the first cities. They required an underclass. Not everyone in Sumer was free. There were slaves, prisoners of war, debt slaves, people who owed money they couldn't repay and sold themselves or their children into servitude. These people had no rights, no protection. They were property. We have contracts written in cuneiform documenting slave sales. Women and children bought and sold like sheep. Prices negotiated, terms specified, all very bureaucratic, all very normal to them. The same people who invented writing and mathematics and law codes also created the first systematic, bureaucratized slavery. That's uncomfortable. We want our heroes to be pure. We want the people who gave us civilization to be noble and enlightened. But history doesn't work that way. The same systems that allowed for unprecedented human cooperation also allowed for unprecedented human exploitation. And the Sumerians knew this. They weren't ignorant of the suffering in their society. They wrote proverbs about the hardship of being poor. They wrote laments about injustice. They created law codes that tried to set limits on exploitation, though those limits were often inadequate. But they didn't tear down the system, because the system worked. It fed people. It created stability. It allowed for art and science and literature to flourish. And if that meant some people suffered, well, that was the price of civilization. Is that a fair trade? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And I don't think the Sumerians knew either, but they made the choice to keep building anyway. Now, let's talk about what happened when everything the Sumerians built started to fall apart. Around 2,300 years before the Common Era, a man named Sargon of Akkad rose to power. The Akkadians spoke a different language than the Sumerians. They lived north of the Sumerian city-states, and Sargon had ambitions that went beyond one city. He wanted to conquer them all. One by one, the Sumerian cities fell. Uruk, Lagash. These cities that had stood for over 1,000 years, that had survived floods and droughts and countless wars with each other, were brought under foreign rule. Imagine being that scribe we talked about at the beginning. You've spent your entire life learning to read and write Sumerian. Your identity, your culture, your religion, it's all tied to your city and your language. And now, foreign soldiers are at your gates. Your king has fallen. Your temple has been plundered. What do? This is where that scribe makes his choice. He keeps writing, because he understands something crucial. A city can be conquered, an army can be defeated, a king can be killed. But ideas written down, those can survive anything. And he's right. Sargon conquers the Sumerian cities, but he doesn't destroy Sumerian culture. He can't. Because everything he needs to run his empire, the writing system, the administrative techniques, the legal codes, the mathematics, it's all Sumerian. His scribes have to learn Sumerian to access the knowledge. His bureaucrats have to use Sumerian methods to collect taxes and manage resources. So, Sargon's empire becomes a fusion, Akkadian military power combined with Sumerian administrative genius. The Sumerian language stops being the everyday language of the region, but it becomes the scholarly language, the language of education and religion and law. Like Latin in medieval Europe, centuries pass, the Akkadian Empire falls, new empires rise, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians. Each one conquers the last. Each one absorbs and transforms the culture that came before. And through all of it, Sumerian ideas keep spreading. The writing system evolves but remains based on cuneiform. The mathematical concepts persist. The legal principles get adopted and adapted. The myths and stories get retold in new languages. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originally written in Sumerian, gets translated into Akkadian, then Hittite, then other languages. It spreads across the ancient world. When the Bible is being written centuries later, it shows clear influences from Mesopotamian mythology. The story of the flood? That's in Sumerian texts 1,000 years before Genesis. The tower reaching to heaven? Sounds a lot like a ziggurat. But then something terrible happens. Around 2,000 years ago, people stop reading cuneiform entirely. The knowledge of how to read it is lost. For almost 2 millennia, all those clay tablets, all those records and stories and laws and scientific observations sit buried in the sand, silent, unreadable. The Sumerians are forgotten. Now jump forward to 1845 CE, southern Iraq. A British archaeologist named Austen Henry Laird starts digging in a mound called Nineveh. He finds massive stone sculptures, winged bulls with human heads, huge palaces, and rooms filled floor to ceiling with clay tablets covered in strange wedge-shaped marks. He has no idea what he's found, neither does anyone else. The writing is completely unknown. It looks like nothing anyone has ever seen. Other archaeologists start digging at other sites. They find more tablets, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. But nobody can read them. For years, decades, scholars struggle with the script. They make slow progress deciphering the Akkadian version of cuneiform. But beneath Akkadian, they find another language, one that doesn't relate to any known language family, one that's far older. Sumerian. Piece by piece, symbol by symbol, brilliant minds crack the code. And suddenly the Sumerians can speak again after millennia of silence. And what do they say? They complain about their homework. They write love poems. They record business deals. They document legal cases. They tell jokes, some of them genuinely funny, some of them crude. They write about their hopes and fears, their faith and doubts, their triumphs and failures. They're human, fully, completely human. Separated from us by 5,000 years, but recognizable in every way that matters. One tablet, written by a father to his son, is particularly striking. The father is disappointed in his son. The son isn't studying hard enough, isn't taking his scribal training seriously. The father writes about how much he's sacrificed, how much he's paid for the son's education, how the son is throwing away his future. You can feel the emotion through 5,000 years of time, the frustration, the love, the fear that his son won't make it in a difficult world. That father has been dead for millennia. His son too. Their city is gone. Their empire is gone. Their language is gone. But that moment, that very human moment of a parent worried about their child, that survived because they wrote it down. So here's what the Sumerians actually gave us. Not just inventions, though there are plenty of those. The wheel, invented originally for pottery, later adapted for transportation. The plow, the sail. Mathematics based on the number 60, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Astronomy so advanced that their observations of planetary movements remained accurate for centuries. Standardized measurements that made trade possible across vast distances. The concept of interest on loans. Insurance contracts. Medical diagnoses and treatments. But more important than any specific invention is what the Sumerians proved was possible. They proved that humans could organize at a scale never before seen. that we could create systems of government and law that transcended tribal loyalties, that we could preserve knowledge across generations through writing, that we could look at a hostile environment and transform it through cooperation and ingenuity, that we could create something larger than ourselves that would outlast our individual lives. They proved that civilization was possible, and they did it knowing full well how fragile it all was. They lived with the constant threat of flood, disease, invasion, and collapse. They knew that everything they built could be destroyed. They knew their gods offered no guarantees. They knew their own lives were temporary and often brutal. They built anyway. That takes a kind of courage that's hard to comprehend. It's easier to build when you think you're guaranteed success, when you believe the universe is on your side, when you're confident in a happy ending. The Sumerians had none of that, and they built the greatest cities the world had ever seen. But I want to end with a question, because the Sumerian story isn't finished. It's still ongoing. Every time you glance at a clock and see time divided into 60-minute hours, you're living in a Sumerian world. Every time you sign a contract or follow a law or send a written message, you're using tools the Sumerians created. We are all, whether we know it or not, the inheritors of what they started. But we're also facing some of the same challenges they faced. How do we organize large numbers of people without creating oppressive hierarchies? How do we distribute resources fairly? How do we preserve knowledge and ensure it's accessible to everyone, not just an elite few? How do we create systems that are both efficient and humane? How do we balance individual freedom with collective responsibility? The Sumerians didn't solve these problems. In many ways, neither have we. But they showed us that it's possible to confront impossible challenges and create something beautiful anyway. They showed us that even in the face of uncertainty, even knowing that everything we build might crumble, it's worth building anyway. Because 5,000 years from now, someone might dig up what we created. They might struggle to understand our language, our customs, our technology. But if we've done our job right, if we've preserved our stories and our knowledge and our ideas, they'll recognize something essential. They'll recognize the very human desire to create, to organize, to leave something behind that matters. They'll recognize the courage it takes to build in the face of uncertainty. They'll recognize themselves in us, just as we recognize ourselves in the Sumerians. That scribe we talked about at the beginning, the one writing as his city fell, his tablet was found in the ruins. We can read his words. We know what he recorded. He documented a transaction, something mundane, something bureaucratic, but he made sure it was recorded accurately even as everything around him collapsed. Because he understood that the act of recording, of preserving, of insisting that this moment mattered, that act itself was an act of hope, an act of defiance against chaos and oblivion. The Sumerians didn't invent civilization because they were smarter than everyone else. They invented it because they refused to accept that the world had to stay the way it was. They looked at an impossible situation and asked, what if we tried something completely new? And then they did it. That's the real legacy. Not the specific inventions, but the audacity to attempt the impossible. The stubborn insistence that humans could do better. The courage to build even when failure seemed inevitable. So, the next time you write something down, the next time you check the time, the next time you follow a law, or sign a contract or attend a school, remember, you're participating in an experiment that started 5,000 years ago in southern Iraq. An experiment that's still ongoing. An experiment that we're all part of. The Sumerians started something. What we do with it, that's up to us.